Sweet. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Um, can you see my browser here? Sweet. So today we're talking about kind of maybe something I alluded to before, which is uh, relations in the database. And so like whenever we first started talking about databases at the beginning of this module, um, we kind of mentioned the difference between something like Postgres, which is like what they refer to as a relational database, and how Mongo is a document database. Um, well, to like make up for that, Mongo has some features that like help you basically make relations with your data. Um, and so I can kind of see here what that would look like. So we've got like a user schema. So just got name, age, and then cars. So this is like you could think about like a parent. Um, and so this user can have many cars. So here they have an array, and the type of that is an object ID. That is the special thing coming from Mongoose, schema.types.object ID. And it has a reference that is to another model name, in this case, car, which would be the same thing here that you would, whatever you named it. So, if we were going to reference a user, then you would put capital U user here. And so that kind of tells that this is going to be an array that is going to be kind of a link to another document. You could also do it without the array and just do the curly braces and just like have this one reference to that document. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. You'll often hear something in relational databases called like one-to-one or one-to-many or many-to-many. So what that means is like I'm going to have many users that will have many cars. Well, no, that would be that would be a one-to-many. So each user would have many cars. That would be one-to-many. Or if in whatever data structure we have, you could only have one car or something if we're on some different system or something. Or like, let's say you're reading a book, right? In our Goodreads case, you could have like the book that you're currently reading, and that would be the reference to that book. So then you would need to have the book document, and then on your user, you could have a reference to that particular book, and that would be a one-to-one because one user can only have one book. There's also many-to-many, meaning like if a user could read multiple books, then you could have an array of books that you're reading. Like I guess if you have multiple in progress, so then that user could have multiple books, but then also that same book could be being read by other users. So that would be like a many-to-many relationship. You don't need to worry too much about that because most of Mongo doesn't necessarily care about that kind of stuff. You just need to worry about here is on this parent object, it will have either one or many of a relation to another collection. So like let's look at that. I kind of have built out a little bit to help us get started. So in day 7, I added a author's path to the UI and an author's component. And inside of this component, it's just kind of a lot of the bare bones stuff that we had in some of the other pages. So I just did a get to the author's route. So just to get all of the authors we have, and I'm mapping through them like we did for the books. And I also created this new component called author modal. So this is going to basically double as like the modal that we will use to create a new author, and also the modal that we will use to edit an author. And so we can kind of look at what that looks like. But we're passing in some props here. So the modal will open if you pass in is creating, or if you pass in author details. I didn't use any types or anything, so it'll be kind of any is on everything. But so author details is going to get spread into this form, and we're going to use the form to populate. So if we already had an existing author, then you could say, author.form would inherit the details that get passed in. So let's say that the author already had a first name, last name. That would get put into the form, and then the form would show up here. Zoom in. Yes. Is that better? Make it a little small. Sweet. Okay. Yeah, so if the author already had a first name, then that would be spread in here, and then the author form first name would be put in here. So that the value that already existed would be put into your form value, and we can kind of look at what that looks like. So in my database, I currently have authors and books collections. My authors, I just have one. It just has first name, last name, and an ID and an age. So if we go to the front end and start building our servers. So this one is in day 7 client. I've already ran npm install. So I'm just going to run npm run start. And that's going to start that one. And then we're going to go and npm, sorry, try not to use my aliases. Start our server. Sweet. Okay. And so now we should have both of those running. If we do a refresh, sweet. So we've got my book, and we're going to go to our new authors page here. So I've got this book, this author, sorry, and then we can create a new author. So then it just has a input for your first name, last name, and your age. I didn't actually wire up any of the editing logic on what that would look like, because currently this is just a link. But what I could do is I could make this a button that would say which we'll probably do today if we have time, but I could just make this a button that's whenever you click on this author, you can edit, open the modal with this author's values. We'll look at that later. I accidentally clicked on that. Okay, so let's create a new author and see what it looks like. Does anybody have any favorite authors? If not, it's going to be Zach. R.L. Stein. Is that the Goosebumps person? He is 75 or something. I don't know. Sweet. R.L.'s his first name. We'll just, because we didn't make a form for that. So I guess that is his first name now. Okay, so now I've got a new author. Go check our database to make sure that this is Postman. Let's get it out of there for now. We don't need that. Can I zoom in here a little bit? Sure. All right, so I've got our new author here. Okay, so what now we need to do is that we need to make the relation to these authors, and we want to know that R.L. Stein has created whatever Goosebumps books or whatever. So we want to make the relation from this author to the book. And so currently we don't have any of his books. So we will go to our code and go on our back end again. So close client. We can just close all this and we'll come back to it. So in the back end, I just kind of bare bones set up some schema stuff. And so we're going to update this. And so we may need to make a new author that will have the new schema applied to it. I'm not sure. We'll see how that works out. But so here we're going to say we're going to have the books. And we're going to say it's an array of all of the books that author has written. And we're going to do object and say the type is going to be the same schema dot types dot object ID, auto-filled for me there. And then we're going to say the reference is to book, because that is what we named it here. Okay. So then also over here, the author is not actually going to matter that much, but we can actually make this an author ID and make it a relation the other way as well. So what we can do instead of author is that we can just say author ID, and we can say type is the same. So we'll just copy this. And then we're going to say, oops, type schema object buff, and then this is going to be user. Okay. I think I can also say this is required. Sweet. Okay, so now like to make a new book, we have to have an author, which kind of means that like when we are creating our book, the author needs to be defined. So like we can't just like make a book anymore and then be like the author is blah 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 and just type it in, because we need to have the database document of an author already created. That way we can have the ID for it. So it's just kind of something we need to think about whenever we're building out the front end on the book creation. Okay, so now we've kind of bound it two ways, which doesn't actually matter. You don't have to do this both ways. This is just for use of ease, because it's like if I want to look at a book, I could see the author. Actually, not author ID. I think it should just be author like that.
Should that be author instead of user?
Author. Yeah, I didn't make it user. Thanks. Good catch. Yeah, so then now we have the one author that wrote this book, which we're not going to think about multiple authors on a book right now. But you could just make it an array as well. Okay, so this one's not required. So you can have an author that doesn't have any books. It'll just be an empty array. But this one, creating the book, you will have to know which author it is. Okay, so now that we have the schema set up, we can look at going to the front end and then setting up creating a book and selecting an author that already exists, and then we'll work on saving that to the back end. So let's close all this API stuff, go back into the server, into the client, and we'll go to pages and author. Okay, not author, we'll go to book. So in this book page, I've already gone ahead and just fetched the authors. It's kind of bad that we're fetching it twice, but it's not the end of the world. Generally, whenever you're working inside of a, production application, something like that, you'd have something that would handle this. Like if you fetched authors on one page, then you could like persist that whenever you go to different components and stuff. I don't know if we learned about Redux or anything in this class. So we're going to get our authors, and we're going to set our authors right here inside of our use state. So it's just an array of authors. And so then we're going to take that and we're going to pass it into our book modal. And so far inside of the book modal, let's look at that. We haven't actually done anything with the authors yet. And you can see that it's kind of a little grayed out. So we can just go ahead and console.log authors and see what we're getting. And then inside of here, we're going to basically make a drop down so that whenever we are going to create a book, we're going to have like a drop down that will just have all of our authors, and then we'll just be able to pick one. That way we can we'll just do it, and then I'll explain it after. So we want to go to books. Actually, we're going to say create book, and we've got no authors. Why do we have no authors? Did my server crash? It did. Schema is not defined. Oh, right here. So instead of importing Mongoose, I actually noticed that it works a little better to help your IntelliSense if you just get them directly. So we'll get the schema and the model from a named import and then get rid of this. And you see that it'll turn green. And now it'll tell you like all this stuff about it, where before it was like just said any and stuff. So maybe it's a little better to do this. And then you can see like when you hover the model, it's like showing you all this information. Okay, so that should fix that. All right, I'm struggling with that. Let's do it this way. There we go. Back to the browser. Oh, it hates me. Okay. All right, retry. Sweet. Okay, so on our last render, a couple renders, we got sweet. Okay, so we got first name, last name, and also it just gave us like an empty books array, which we can handle that later. But now let's say create book, and you'll see that this is like logging before we actually like open the button. That's something you got to think about a lot whenever you're doing something like this. So this whole modal just exists inside of this component, and so this component does get rendered by the books component. So every time this re-renders, books modal will also re-render. It's just not showing until this value is true. So like things are still happening in here while that's happening. Okay, so what we've got is our first name, last name, age, books, and ID. And so let's look at how to make a dropdown, which I conveniently looked through the React Bootstrap documentation before. So what it looks like is you've got a form.select. This doesn't matter so much. I guess it's just like a default, and then we got a different value, different options. And so it just is value, whatever the value is, and then the label. So what we can do is copy this, come back to our code, go into our modal, and so this is all just copied over from the author's stuff, so it still says like first name, last name. So we're gonna fix some of that stuff. So we're gonna have the title of the new book, and we're gonna have the title here. These will both be title. Sweet. Okay, so that one's done. And then inside of the second one, we're gonna want this to be the author. And form.control, instead of control, we actually want that to just paste in over this what ours is. Oops, just this part. Okay, so let's just see what that looks like inside of our UI before we mess with anything. Okay, so now we've got this thing here. There's a little warning, doesn't matter a whole lot. Okay, so we've got these options. 1, 2, 3, sweet. So we have these authors, and we need to print out like JSX of options. So one way that we could do it is just mapping through each of our authors to make one option. And so to do that, I'm going to write a method to just keep it cleaner down here. We'll just call this create author options. And inside of create author options, we're going to just return authors.map. It's going to be an author. And inside of here, we're going to do some JSX. And what we want in here is basically just one of these things. And so value, instead of being a number here, we're going to want this to be the ID of the author. Author.id, I think it's an underscore. And then in here, we're going to want this to be their first name. Okay. So now we're going to take all of the authors that exist. So there's 2 currently, and we're going to make 2 options, one for each of them. That is going to say the ID and then the first name and last name of that author. And so what we can do to simplify this a little bit is destructure some of these values. So we've got ID, first name, and last name. So let's delete those. I forgot name. I also can't spell. Sweet. Okay, so now we just need to call this inside of our we need to call this inside of our form down here, so we can add our options to it. Okay, and let's see what that looks like. Sweet. So we've got two options here. We click it, Awesome. Okay, so far we have like a form that already exists for like our title and everything else. So we actually, instead of letting this thing manually handle its own state, we're going to set it our state ourselves. So we're going to want to do something like what we did up here. So on change format.select. On change is set book form, and it's going to be author target.value. Yeah. This could be prettier. It's okay. And the value will be the same that we have up here, book form dot author. Okay. Let's see if that breaks everything or not. Sweet. Okay, this seems to work. And then so now we're gonna just delete this age for now, and we'll come back to that one. And we'll add in the rest of the fields that we need. Okay. So whenever save author gets called, it's going to call a handle submit function. Let's see what that looks like. So we don't need this anymore. So a handle submit is going to call the on submit that is getting passed in through the props, and it's also going to call this handle close, which is just going to clean up some stuff for us. So it's going to call the on close, also coming from the props, and then it's also going to call the set book form back to the default values, which we need to update this as well. So the title, author is that, and age we don't care about right now. Okay. Okay, so let's see what on submit looks like and see if we can just console log inside of that. So book modal is getting rendered here. We've got this on submit that's calling save book. And so this is actually making a post request to /books with the book. But before we do that, let's just make sure everything looks good. So we're just going to say console.log and the book. Okay, so let's try that if it works. The title is my new book. Sweet. Save it. Okay, so now you can see we got the title and then we got that author's ID. And so what we can do is now we're going to look at what the backend looks like whenever we try to save this new book. So we're going to make this post to /books. So let's go to the backend and see what that looks like. So get this book, and then we're going to create a book, and then we're going to save it, and then we're just returning it currently. So what we need to do is while we create this book, we also are attaching that book to that author. So then also inside of here, we're going to want to, I think you can pass a function of this, right? Save. Let's look at the document for what happens when you save it. There we go. Okay, nice. So you can see in here we say new author and then we're saying author.save, and we're passing a function. So you can pass a function in and do something. So it's like if there's an error. So in our case, that would be we're going to call save right here on the book. And then if there's an error saving the book, then we would handle that, right? And so then after we save the book, we are wanting to do something else right here. So inside of this function, after we save the book, we actually have access to the book, which they're not doing it here, but there's another thing that this function should give us. So let's look at that. So we've got an error, and then we've got the book, it should be. And so let's conf.log both of those. I don't know that it likes when you pass the function and the await. I don't know that we actually need this anyways, because we're doing the try catch. Okay, doesn't matter. So then after you come down here, we've got this created book. And you can say created book dot ID that will exist. And so this is the ID that we're going to want to put inside of our author. So then we're going to say author from our model. Author.find by ID, and we can say this book.author, because that's the author ID that we're getting from the form. Let's see what's the best way to add it to here. Saving ref, setting populated fields, field selection, populating multiple paths.
Are you just trying to set the?
Yeah, I just want to set, see like here, they're just setting the one ID on the thing that they care about. I just have like an array, so I just wanted to not override it because author will have many books. So like I've got this const author equals await, and then this will be the author, and then we can say author dot books will equal this, and it will be this created book.id. So I guess I could just do author dot books and spread that in, or something like that. And then say created book dot underscore ID, something like that. So this will be all of the books that currently existed on the author. I think we actually need to populate this. So now we're going to look at what. So just inherently, whenever you call books, like right now, like let's say I do this. Let's just log and see what happens. There. And we're not going to save this. No, we will save it. That needs to be awake too. Okay. So let's go to our front end and run this and see what happens. So we're going to create a new book and give it a new title. Going to give it an author, save it. Go to the back end, see what happens in our data here. So R.L. Stein has a book and it's this ID, right? And so books is an empty array. So now if I do it again, is kind of what I'm thinking about here. Is if I create another book and give it to R.L. Stein, I don't know that the first one will show up. So this is going to be another book, unless you call its special little method, save it. Okay, looks like I don't need to do nothing fancy for it yet. Okay, so this should be fine then, and I will explain why I was worried about. Okay, so now books has both of these object IDs. Okay, so now kind of the whole point of this is that I'm wanting to be able to look at an author and see all of the author's books, right? But currently, if you look at the database, right, all that we have here is just a bunch of IDs, not actual book documents. And so like you could like manually map through that yourself on inside of your server, but it's better to let the database handle operations like that, which is where Mongo is providing for us. And so what we need to look at is whenever we're going to fetch authors, we want to see all of the books that are on the authors. And so we need to go to the authors routes and do our get. So here we have authors. So I need to populate on each. Oh, it's on the call. Okay. So here we say dot find, and you want to say this little method called populate. And so what this is doing is it's going to take in the string, which in this case is going to be, you see here, they're passing in the name of the collection or of the field that actually exists. So in ours, our author has books. So we're going to say books. So we're going to populate the books field. And so what that means is it's going to take that, it's going to look at the schema, and it's going to say, okay, I've got this relation, this reference that we created in our schema, and it's going to say, I've got this author that I found, and they have 3 different IDs that all relate to books that exist in the books table. And so I'm going to take that document of the book and I'm going to put it into the author. And so now when we're getting authors, we're actually going to be getting an array of books that exist of documents. The entire book document will be in an array on the authors instead of just the ID of the books. And so what that will look like is if we come to the front end here, refresh, not logging anything anymore. So we need to go to the books page. Sure. So we're getting authors passed in from above here. So let's console.log our authors and see what they look like. Okay, so that, like, Braden doesn't have anything. We need the other one. So R.L. Stein, you'll see, and we have their books. And so this is going to be the entire book object. And so that's kind of everything kind of interconnected in here because we're not thinking about the structure too hard and like what our actual use case is. But so currently we have each author will come back with every book that they've written, and they will have an array of the entire book object for each book. So that is like, now we've set up the relation between the books and the authors. And so what we can do is do another one. Technically, it's not that useful for us in our current use case to do that on our get here. Like this populate doesn't matter that much because we don't actually have a use case for that. But what we can do is do a get by ID on the author and then populate that one. Find by ID, and we're going to want to do a parameter request dot query. Whoops. Okay, so we're gonna get this ID from our query. It's actually not a query, it's param. Glad we remembered how to do this. Okay, so we're gonna find an author by ID. And so now the use case of like find by ID is, say we go to a individual author page, which would be equivalent to what we have on the front end right now as the book details page. So we'll create a new author details page that when we go to that page, we will be able to make a request here. And so then on the author page, let's say you wanted to be like, okay, here's the author, here's all the books they've written. And so then if we populate right here on books, then now we have access to all of the data that the author needs. Every book that the author's written will be authors, it's just one author. Every book that the author's written will be populated onto that document inside of its own array so that we can just map through that data on the front, and we don't need to make a separate request being like get the author and then make another request to get the books that that author has written. So this kind of handles it for us all in one go. So that's kind of the idea of the relation. So let's make the front end for this and see the use in it in the front end. Let's just start cleaning some of this up. Close everything. Go back in from the top. Okay, so we have the author page. Let's make a new file and call it the author details page. And we'll copy the book page. And we actually don't need this modal. This is kind of leftover, and we have the author modal and the book modal inside of here, so we can actually delete this from the book details page, and we'll get to that later. Okay, none of this super matters. Okay, so this component is going to be called author details, and we don't care about, this is lowercase a, we don't care about this, we don't care about this, we do need this. Use effect once, get author details, and then we're going to say get author details at authors / ID. Set the author details like that. And then in here, we're going to say console.log author details. Sweet. Get rid of some of the stuff. Okay. And I'm in navigation, so I'm just going to have to use the path for it. Okay, so here we have the authors page, and we're going to say go to Braden Robbins, who actually hasn't written anything, so it doesn't matter here. Console.log author details. Oh, we don't have a route for this, I don't think. Our React doesn't know where it wants us to go. We just linked to, I believe. Let's see. Index, yeah. Okay, so in here we need to set it up like we did for the book details. We need a author details route in the front end. So our authors / ID, and it's going to be the author details component. Keep them together. And okay, there we go. So now our component's rendering and we are logging. And so you see here we've got those books that exist on the author. And so I'm doing a refresh. So like I've never fetched any book data or anything. That all just exists on the author because we made that relation and because we called populate whenever we were querying that data out of the database. So now we've got the books on the author. And so then in here, inside the author details page, we could map through that and say author details. If that exists, then we're going to take the books from it and then map through those. And take a book. And so this will actually look exactly like what this looks like over here. So we can just copy that. And so then that's the point whenever I'm just copying and pasting that you would want to like extract this into its own component. So you could call this just like books list or something. But this kind of shows you like it's all kind of a cascading thing. And so the front end is kind of mirroring our data structure where the author is now becoming the top of everything. And so inside of the author details page, we're going to have a list of all of their books, which will look exactly like the books page. So then they kind of will use the same components, but for now we can just copy and paste and it'll work fine. So we need this to be the author.books, author details. And we need to get our link from Dom. Sweet. Okay. So then inside of our authors page, now we're linking to both books, and then that we could go to book details. So now we're on book details, I think, right? Double check our path. Yeah, it is just /ID. And so now we've got all the details from our book, even though our book doesn't have these because we never created it with those fields. Cool. So now we can create a book. Well, also on the authors page. This is kind of where it starts. So at the beginning, you create an author. What happened? Click on the wrong one. You create an author. The author will show up here. You'll click on your one author, in this case, R.L. Stine. You'll see their books. So the author details page, you could be like, edit that author's information. So that's where you would use the edit modal. Or you could say like, add a book to this author, and then you could open the book modal. But then in the drop down, make it automatically set to just be that author ID. Okay, we kind of covered a lot all at once without any breaks or anything. Does anyone have any questions about any of the front end stuff or any of the relations between the two data? Nothing. Everybody understands perfectly. Okay, from the other side, we could also do it since this is not like 100% necessary, but we also, sorry, the wrong folder here. We also created our book model to have a relation to the author that exists on it. And so we could even go the other way, whenever we fetch a book, we want to populate the author and display that author's information. So inside of our books route, whenever we're saying get books right here, find books, we can say that populate and then the field name, which is going to be author. And so it's going to take the ID and it's going to return the actual object. So then whenever we're saying, boom, get our books, we're just filtering here, so that doesn't matter so much. And then we're going to go to our books route, and we'll need to log it out because it's not going to actually show us anything yet. Pages, books, get books. So this book existed before we created the relation, so don't worry about that one. If you wanted to fix this, you need to write a script that would basically map through any book that doesn't have an author and apply whatever author was appropriate. But this one, you can see we've got this object that is the entire author. So it's, I think, okay, cool. So you can kind of see that it gave us the author with the books, which is kind of, it's weird to do from both sides. You wouldn't normally do like the book's author ID like this if we were planning for the author to be like the parent, because now we're basically seeing like this little loop where I could say populate this author field and it'll give me the author, but then the author has like it's self-referencing its own book because like this is its own ID. So it's a little funky, but you basically just follow whatever your use case was. If you needed to have like our case, like the authors page, then you would just do that, and you wouldn't actually need like just to do this part where we say I've got these books on my author. You wouldn't actually need the book to know about the author ID at all. Um, and so that's kind of it. Zach, what you got? Anything extra we need to add?
No, I don't think so. So, well, I mean, I'm gonna add some stuff. But with Mongo, that is just like one flavor of how to do it, what Braden just showed you. You'll see all kinds of different things just based off the need of the application. So, like just because Mongo is so flexible of like how you can store data, so you may just store all the books directly on the author if that's all your app needed, and you would never have a separate collection. Or all the authors would just be on the books, and all you have is books, and you don't have a separate collection for author. It's all kind of up to you as a developer based off of what like how does the information need to be displayed in the app, and like I'll just store my information in the database in a format similar to that. Whereas if you're doing a relational data, if you're doing like, if you're not doing Mongo, if you're doing, we've talked about like SQL or other stuff, you have no choice but to like make those relations typically. And just one other thing I'll add is like, you can also, like a lot of times in Mongo, you will do certain things on the server that normally you, like in another database, you would push to the database. For example, like if we needed to show all the books for an author on a page, like we could potentially just do a search on the books collection for a particular author ID and like have like a fully separate query that is like populating all the books, and then like a separate query that's getting the author for the first part of the page. So there's just like a bunch of different ways to do it. But definitely like using populate and doing it where you're like setting it in the schema is like probably one of the better ways to do it. It's certainly not the only way. Yeah, and hopefully just like data has relations and stuff is related, like, and so there's like ways in databases to relate things. Like hopefully that just makes some intuitive sense. Now you'll start like when you think about any web app that you use, like you'll just start seeing relations and thinking that way, hopefully. Cool. So you guys learned everything. That's it. That's all there is to learn. And yeah, Saturday's the last class, and we'll be trying to kind of flesh out our Goodreads app as much as we can. Thank you, Braden. I'm kidding. There's obviously still more to learn, but
That's it. That's all you need to know.
That is like you know, like you should sort of kind of see like how the internet works or how web apps work at this point. For you to feel like there's the rugs or the, I don't know what the term is for, you know, the curtain's been lifted. You've seen the Wizard of Oz stuff. So, all right. That's all I got, Brad.
Sweet. Well, I guess we can wrap it up a little early today.
Cool.
Let's talk.